So late this week, Trump replaced his controversial pick for Attorney General with another controversial pick, former Florida AG Pam Bondi. She is an election denier and, of course, a MAGA loyalist. And while the fight to keep Matt Gaetz from becoming Attorney General is over, that's done, some House Democrats still want the Ethics Committee's report on his alleged misconduct to be made public. This week, Illinois Congressman Sean Casten introduced a privilege resolution seeking the release of that report. And Congressman Casten joins us now. He serves on the House Financial Services Committee and is a member of the Transparency Caucus. Welcome, Congressman.
And it's his birthday.
And it's his birthday.
It is his birthday.
Happy birthday.
And I am sure, Congressman, that you always dreamed of waking up on your birthday and talking about Matt Gaetz. So happy birthday to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been wishing for this for years.
So let's talk about this. I think there are folks who will ask why it matters that this report is released and what it is that House Democrats can do to sort of force the Ethics Committee's hand here.
Well, let's take the first question, why it matters. None of us would want to work in an environment where you can commit the crimes that Matt Gaetz is alleged to have committed, including, let's not sugarcoat this, allegations of having sex with a minor child. None of us would want to work in a place where simply by resigning from your job, or in the first instance, seeking to be transferred to a different division, allows you to wipe all that under the rug. This matters. It also matters for the integrity of the House. You know, we talk about this from a legal perspective, but all of us know in our lives that there is a standard of what is ethical, there is a lower standard of what's legal, and then there is a lower standard still of what's cost effectively prosecutable. Donald Trump's life, the people he surrounds himself with, are people who make it expensive to prosecute him for his crimes. We have to remind the American people that in the House, we care about ethics. When you have elections, that we are the country that is not always perfect, but at least aspires to that vision that our founders laid out, where no one is above the law. And to do that, we need to release this report.
I appreciate that approach, because when you were speaking there, Congressman, it just reminded me of other institutions that have tried to hide the sins of their failings, of their members and those who are part of their organization by setting them aside. But those things always come back to haunt.
Indeed, and it doesn't help the credibility of those institutions as we think about them, does it?
It does not. It does not. And so that to me is, again, one of the tools that I think Democrats have, not just to talk about from the ethics standpoint, but procedurally and process-wise. You need votes to get this done, right? You get this in front of the House. Talk to us a little bit about the process so people understand not just what the intent is, but what it's going to take to get it done.
Yeah, so this is a unique place where the House really has some authority over the Senate as we think about all of these Trump cabinet picks. The Senate has the advice and consent clause, but in this case, the ethics report was done by the House. We have the ability to release this. Now, what the privileged resolution that we've brought forward simply says that the House members have to go on record, yes or no, of releasing this report. So the House members cannot say, well, the Ethics Committee told us it wasn't done. Well, we know that's not true because they were prepared to vote on this last July. They can't hide behind that. So this doesn't guarantee it would be released, but it forces every member of the House to come forward and vote yes or no for the public to see of should this information be released. And, given how tight the balance of the House is, and quite candidly, how many members of the Republican caucus there are who, while they might turn a blind eye to sexual assault, genuinely do not like Matt Gaetz, there is the very real possibility of that being forced to be released through a House vote.
Congressman, this whole conversation throughout the course, ever since former Congressman Gaetz was nominated, to me, I was just so struck by it, because if he were qualified, this would be the one thing that should be the disqualification of why he should not serve. But he wasn't qualified for the position that he was nominated for in the first place. What was his qualification to be the Attorney General of the United States of America? The fact that he went to law school and passed the bar? I mean, it's just kind of like the very serious things that we are learning about via press reports and what is in this ethics report, frankly, as I have been saying, are cherries on top of an already really nasty cake. And it seems to me that Speaker Johnson has thrown his, weight behind speaking out on a number of things that have nothing to do with the issues that the American people are most focused on. He's spoken out about the report and had many meetings and conversations and talked about what he thinks should be done with this report and decorum and how he thinks this should not become public. Speaker Johnson, he's jumping in with Nancy Mace talking about where a member can use the bathroom. Like, this just seems to me like not a focused Republican caucus here.
Well, look, there's a tremendous sadness here that we shouldn't lose sight of. I mean, Matt Gaetz is indeed, as you say, not qualified to hold himself above the law and make sure that the law applies equally to everybody by any stretch. We've also got people who are nominated. The DOE secretary is a climate denier. Tulsi Gabbard is a very clear national security threat. We could go on down the list, but I think what scares a lot of us who served in Congress during the last Trump administration is that Trump puts loyalty above talent. And when he nominates people, the Republican House and Senate have found it very difficult, if not impossible, to stand up to Donald Trump. And, all of us are still struggling with the fact that the last time Donald Trump nominated someone with a credible history of sexual assault to the Senate, that was Brett Kavanaugh. We know in hindsight that the FBI was blocked from completing that investigation, and the Republican senators basically didn't care. They thought it was easier to give a lifetime appointment to somebody with those charges against them than it was to stand up to Donald Trump. And so that really comes to this point where we're saying, if we care about that stuff, if we think these things matter, if we think that the dignity of the United States requires putting people who, look, we can disagree on political issues, but my goodness, put someone who truly does hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal, that, that equal protection under the law matters. If we care about those things, and we are a co-equal branch, stand up for it. And we simply have lost any confidence that not Republican voters, but elected Republicans in Washington will stand up for those basic foundational principles of our democracy.